In part one of ecology, we're going to be focusing on just the basics of ecology. Important terms, kind of a review of some terms, how these terms interact with each other, and then we'll look at something called succession, ecological succession, and what it is and why it's important to the biological and ecological community. So as far as the important terms go, we start off with the basics, start off with the review. We know ecology is just looking at the interaction of your living, your biotic organisms, or the living part of life, and how it interacts with their physical environment, the abiotic parts of that ecosystem. More important terms, we have a habitat. We know a habitat is where an organism lives. We know you take a large number of one type of organism, say it's a white-tailed deer, and you put a lot of white-tailed deer together. These white-tailed deer share similar DNA. They have the ability to interbreed, so they're going to be considered a species. The big thing about a species, it's a species because they have that similar DNA, but they have to have that ability to interbreed, produce offspring. And then a niche would be the role that species plays within the environment. Take, for example, deer ticks. Deer ticks are found a lot with mammals like white-tailed deer and moose deer and elk, and their specific role, what that specific role would be, would actually be making sure that on their side of things that they try to limit the size of the deer population, so the deer population or the moose population doesn't get too big, which then could cause the vegetation within that particular community to collapse, losing the deer population overall. Some more terms that should be a review for you. We know that a population is when you take a species, say a deer, a white-tailed deer, and you take a lot of those white-tailed deer and you put them together in the same place, and you get a population of white-tailed deer. A community, you take a lot of different populations, white-tailed deer, some red squirrels, maybe some different types of birds, different species of birds. You take all of them and you put them together within the same habitat, then you get a community. And then you take that community, all the living organisms that make up the different populations, you take that community and you add in the abiotic factors, those physical, non-living parts of the community, like the water systems, the water supplies, the rocks and soil, the temperature, the weather conditions, the climate. You put all that together and you get an ecosystem. Now, throughout the terms biotic and abiotic factors, this should be a review, but our biotic factors are just the living parts of the environment. Any living organism that is a part of a particular environment, whether it be the different types of grasses, the different types of bacteria, different types of insects, all the way up to your birds and your trees and your larger mammals, deer, elephants, so forth. The abiotic factor is going to be that part of the environment that is non-living. The climate, rocks, the water, the air, the temperature, storms that could go through with the weather conditions. Those are all non-living aspects of the environment. And then biodiversity is key. Biodiversity is something that you remember from your days in biology, but what it is where you're looking at a nice variety of different types of species living within an ecosystem. The greater the biodiversity, the greater the number of species populations that you have, different populations that you have within an ecosystem, the more biodiverse that ecosystem is and the healthier it is. For example, the rainforest, one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. Roughly 75% of the biodiversity on the planet is found in the rainforest, the different types of trees and plant species mixed in with the animal species. So greater the biodiversity, the more health you have within that ecosystem, and that ecosystem is able to flourish because of that. So that was a good review on important terms as far as ecology and ecology basics. One of the first things I want to look at is when we're starting off with ecology, we have to look at how succession occurs, how that ecosystem or how that environment takes shape and how it evolves. Succession is something we can do as far as looking at the evolution of a particular ecosystem. So when succession occurs, this is just a progression of how certain species, certain populations replace other populations, and your ecosystem, your biome grows from something that maybe where it starts out with nothing or very little to nothing as far as populations and species diversity and biodiversity, and eventually reaches that climax community. So let's look at how succession progresses in the different stages. When primary succession occurs, this is when you have nothing as far as an established ecosystem, no type of living organisms or populations, so it starts from nothing. An example would be a new island that's formed. You have a new island that's formed out in the ocean due to volcanic activity. That new island, there's no plant life, there's no soil to allow for plant life, there's no animals. So starting from nothing, say as a new island, would be an example of primary succession. Secondary succession, in this type of succession, you originally had an ecosystem or an environment, and then something happened to that ecosystem causing it to be wiped out, flood or fire, something to cause it to completely wipe out the living populations and communities within that ecosystem or that environment, and then it has to start over. But it still has soil and a root system and an established environment that just you lost the vegetation, say due to a fire, and it's going to start over from that point. So primary succession, you're starting from nothing. Eventually soils will be formed due to weathering and erosion. Seeds will make it there through birds and other processes. Then you get plants to grow, and then larger plants and your trees that can sustain larger vertebrates. And the secondary is when you wipe it out through a natural process, and then it can grow back. Pioneer species are going to be those organisms that first inhabit a new environment, a new ecosystem. All right, so when primary succession is occurring, you have a new environment taking shape, say at the start of a new island. Those pioneer species are going to be the first organisms to live and inhabit that new area. It usually starts out small. Once your soils form due to weathering and erosion, you'll get bacteria that'll start to grow. You'll get birds that migrate and they'll stop off. They'll drop things, seeds and other things. Maybe you'll get smaller vertebrates that travel through water, waves and currents, and they'll reach this area. Then you get these smaller plants, mosses, lichen that'll grow. Eventually they'll give way to smaller grasses and shrubs. And then as time progresses, you'll get the larger trees, the larger forests start to take hold, and this will allow for birds, smaller mammals, reptiles to take hold, and then your environment can reach its climax.